But now we get his actual theory of weakness of will. It is different in a variety of very important ways from the Platonic theory. So even if he follows Plato in metaphysics, postulating a realm of forms, talking about ascent out of the cave, the divided line, and so on, he rejects utterly Plato's conception of what the soul is. Here's how he puts it. I did many actions in which the will to act was not equalled by the power. I was not doing what with an incomparably greater longing I yearned to do, and could have done the moment I so resolved. For as soon as I had the will, I would have had a wholehearted will. At this point, the power to act is identical with the will. The willing itself was performative of the action. Nevertheless, it did not happen. The body obeyed the slightest inclination of the soul to move the limbs at its pleasure more easily than the soul obeyed itself, when its supreme desire could be achieved exclusively by the will alone. What's the cause of this monstrous situation? He asks. Why is it the case? May your mercy illuminate me, as I ask if perhaps an answer can be found in the hidden punishments and secret tribulations that befall the sons of Adam. In other words, maybe this is really to be attributed to original sin. It was the fall of Adam and Eve that then has misshapen the soul of every one of us. What causes this monstrous fact, and why is it so? The mind commands the body and is instantly obeyed. I say, rise, hand, and it rises. I say, fall, and it falls. Move this way, move that way. It does what I command. But when the mind commands itself, it meets resistance. That does seem monstrous. The problem, he's saying, isn't really the mind-body problem. It's not how on earth are mind and body interacting. It's how does the mind interact with itself? How can the mind command itself? That's much harder than commanding the body. The mind orders the mind to will. The recipient of the order is itself, yet it does not perform it. What causes this monstrosity, and why does it happen? Mind commands, I say, that it should will, and would not give the command if it did not will, yet it does not perform what it commands. This is just as in Paul. I do the thing I hate, and I do not do the thing I love. Why? The willing is not wholehearted, and so the command is not wholehearted. The strength of the command lies in the strength of the will, and the degree to which the command is not performed lies in the degree to which the will is not engaged. For it is the will that commands the will to exist, and it commands not another will, but itself. So the will that commands is incomplete, and therefore what it commands does not happen. If it were complete, it would not need to command the will to exist, since it would exist already. Therefore there is no monstrous split between willing and not willing. We're dealing with a morbid condition of the mind, which when it's lifted up by the truth does not unreservedly rise to it, but is weighed down by habit. So there are two wills, neither of them is complete, and what is present in the one is lacking in the other. So there are two wills, neither of them is complete, and what is present in the one is lacking to the other. But we want to be very careful here. We do not want to conclude, as the Manichees do, that we really do have two minds and two distinct natures. Christ has two minds, two wills, a fully human nature and a fully divine nature. But we are fully human. We are not in the same position. And so even though he's talked about two wills here, be careful. There are not two minds, a good mind and an evil mind. We are not battling between what you might say is a natural mind attached to the cave and then some spiritual mind that is capable of leading us out of it. It's not as if we have a fleshly nature and a spiritual nature. No, we are unified, in fact far more unified than Plato thinks. But we'll get to that in a moment. Here is the idea. The sense in which we have two wills is that we are capable of willing the will to will. Okay, we can say, choose this, and yet somehow we don't choose it. There is a will that's making the choice, but we have, as it were, a higher order will that is capable of reflecting on that willing itself, and willing to will or willing not to will, that is, in some cases, unwilling to will what we nevertheless will. So in short, you might think, it's one thing to will to do something, another thing to will to do something. Those things are independent. I can will without willing to will. In fact, willing not to will. That is what he means by willing unwillingly. Of course, I can also will to will what I do not will. I may will to will making the right choice, but that doesn't mean that my will, in the sense of my choice, actually follows. So when Paul says, I do the thing I hate, what's going on there? He wills to will what he loves, but he doesn't do it. He does the thing he hates. And so he wills to make the right choice, but he makes the wrong choice. His will is saying, will the right thing, and yet he wills the wrong thing in the end. So there is a difference between willing and willing to will. And that, I think, is the key here. But it's not as if there are two me's, a spiritual nature and a bodily nature, a good part and a bad part. It's not as if I have a good, angel and a bad devil on two sides of my soul telling me what to do. No, it is rather a matter of my ability to reflect on my own willing and to make choices, or at least will to make choices, about my own choosing. So I can will something, and I can do it wholeheartedly, meaning not only willing it, but willing to will it. But I can also do it in a way that is not wholehearted. I can will without willing to will it. Maybe I'm uncertain, or maybe I actually will not to will it. But nevertheless, I violate that. Paul is saying, look, I will not to will the things I end up willing. I choose the things I do not want to choose. And that's something that is, he says, a monstrous situation, but nevertheless, that's what's going on in our human situation. Now, the result of that is that the self which willed to serve was identical with the self which was unwilling. It was I. I was neither wholly willing nor wholly unwilling, so I was in conflict with myself. I was dissociated from myself. The dissociation came about against my will. In other words, I wanted to will what I will to will. And that's a nice point. I will to will what I will to will. And that's not something I was able in the end to do. This was not a manifestation of the nature of an alien mind, but the punishment suffered in my own mind. And so it was not I that brought this about, but sin which dwelt within me. Here he quotes Paul again, Romans 7. Sin resulting from the punishment of a more freely chosen sin because I was a son of Adam. So here you see, it's not that original sin places us in the position of having an evil mind within us as well as a good mind. It is instead that original sin makes that dissociation possible. We can will what we do not will to will. I can, in the end, choose to do what I do not want to choose. And that ability for the higher and lower levels to come apart is precisely the echo of original sin. It is also something fundamentally human nature, but it is within me, that split between, as it were, what I choose and then what I reflectively approve of or disapprove of. That is really the divide in my soul. It's not a divide between different parts of the soul. It's simply a matter that I am capable of reflecting on, approving or disapproving, willing or not willing, the things I will. And that ability is part of what it is to be a conscious being. I am capable not only of consciousness of the world, but of self-consciousness, of being aware of my own states of awareness. And part of that is a matter. That's, by the way, I think what it means, talking about the fruit of the tree of knowledge, the knowledge of good and evil. That ability to know in the sense of becoming self-conscious, being aware of my own awarenesses. And in this case, being capable of evaluating my own states of mind, willing to will something, willing not to will something, but having that reflective willing be different from the unreflective willing that in the end leads me to choose, and often choose in a way that I do not want to choose. Augustine closes by giving us a critique of Plato's theory. Why not say much more simply that there are three parts to the soul? Or maybe if you think there's some alien thing that is not captured by emotion, desire, and reason, a fourth part. He says, look, if we go down that path, we don't end up with three parts of the soul or even four. We end up with thousands of parts of the soul. And here's why. If there are as many contrary natures as there are wills in someone beset by indecision, there will be not two wills, but many. If a person is deliberating whether to go to the Manichees convention or to the theater, they cry, here are two natures. A good one leads one way, a bad one leads the other way. How otherwise to explain the opposition of two wills to one another? But I affirm they're both evil, both the will to attend their meeting and the will to go to the theater. They think the intention to go along can only be good. Well, what then? Suppose two Catholic Christians are arguing with one another and wondering what they should do. It can be good things. They might be wondering, should we read the Psalms? Should we study the New Testament? Should we go back and read Exodus and Deuteronomy? Those are all good choices. Should we go help the poor? Should we be involved in some other charity to help our fellow man? Those are all good things. And the will might be torn between them, just as it might be torn between various evil possibilities and evil and good. After all, we could be thieves saying, yes, I love to steal automobiles. Should I steal that Porsche? Or what about that Maserati over there? That looks awfully good. And that sort of tension can happen too. We can experience conflicts among good things, among bad things, among things that are good and bad choices. All of those are possible. And there might be many such choices and many such willings. Now the point is in part this. Within desire, I can have conflicting desires. I can want to read the Psalms and also read Paul. I can want to steal the Porsche and steal the Maserati, but I can't do both. Augustine gives some wonderful examples of this. He says both wills are evil when someone is deliberating whether to kill a person by poison or by dagger, whether to encroach on one estate belonging to someone else or a different one when he can't do both, whether to buy pleasure by lechery or avariciously to keep his money, whether to go to the circus or the theater if both are putting on a performance the same day, or to steal from another person's house if the occasion permits, or, to add a fourth option, to commit adultery at the same time the chance is available. Well, it might be that all those things are desired at once simultaneously. They tear the mind apart by the mutual incompatibility of the wills. And so it looks like desires can come into conflict with one another. The same is true of emotions. Catullus has a famous poem, Odi et Amo. I hate and I love. Why, perhaps you ask? I do not know. But I feel it and I am in torment. That's the entire poem. And it captures that idea of being trapped between two conflicting emotions. In fact, psychologists have a name for this, an approach avoidance conflict. You can be torn, attracted to something with emotion leading you toward it and another emotion leading you away. Emotions can come into conflict. The same is even true of reason. Think of a paradox like the liar paradox. This sentence is false. Well, if it's true, it says it's false, so it must be false. So I guess it's false. But wait, it says it's false, so it has to be true. Reason leads me into a conundrum. It produces reasons for thinking it's false and reasons for thinking it's true. And the same thing can happen in all sorts of ways. In fact, it becomes a genre of medieval philosophical literature, expressed in Peter of Lombard's Sentences, for example, or Abelard's Sic et Non. It survives in Kant's Antinomies of Reason, where we have rational arguments in favor of opposing conclusions. So all of those kinds of conflicts are possible. We end up with thousands of parts of the soul. Roughly speaking, every desire, every emotion, every rational thought ends up being its own part of the soul. If we adopt Plato's principle that nothing can oppose itself, there must be two conflicting forces whenever we feel conflict. So, in short, we end up with an infinite number of parts of the soul if we adopt Plato's position. It's much simpler to have one that is capable of reflecting on itself, and reflecting on the nature of its desires, the nature of its emotions, the nature of its rational conclusions, and yes, the nature of its willing. And to will that willing, or to will not to will in the way that the mind initially wants to will. But of course, we're in a position where we can say it is possible to will something in the sense of choosing it, but not to will that. That is to say, to will the act, but to will not to will that act.